Welcome. Our presenter today is Charles Gibson, owner and president of CodeStar Incorporated. Charles has been providing effective information technology solutions to small businesses for 23 years. He's also been a control systems engineer, a software developer, adjunct faculty with the University System of New Hampshire, and a trainer for the New Hampshire Manufacturing Extension. He holds a master's degree in information assurance from Norwich University, a national leader in cybersecurity training.
We have put together a three-part series we call Cybersecurity for Nonprofits. I'd like to thank Brattleboro Community Television and all the stakeholders at CodeStar who have worked so hard to allow us to bring you this presentation today. Let's start. Episode 1, don't be scared, be prepared. We like Halloween around here, and it's October, so don't be scared. In the series, what we want to do is demystify cybersecurity. It's a big field. It covers a lot of areas, and we forget sometimes that there's a lot of jargon involved. What we want to do is explain the concepts we want to talk about today in plain language, and we want to answer some common questions and show you how you can prioritize and make improvements in your cybersecurity, even with limited resources. This presentation is geared for nonprofits, but if you're a small business, it will help you as well. At CodeStar, we like to say that your company's digital information, customer data, financial records, and any kind of digitized business correspondence, including intellectual property, like that logo that you worked so hard to get just right, those things are quite literally the crystallized value of your business, and it resides on your workstations and your servers where it becomes vulnerable to certain kinds of risks. Part 1 today is for decision makers and anybody in your organization who is responsible for implementing cybersecurity. Now, we know it's not easy. Of course, if you had unlimited time and unlimited money, you could accomplish anything. You wouldn't have to be listening to a seminar. You would just hire your own cybersecurity operations center and be done with it. There's another factor, though, and that's know-how. CodeStar today, and I am going to talk to you about how you can begin to recognize the risks that affect your business data and the additional responsibilities that you might have, how you can get started with risk management as a business process. We're also going to give you a couple of tips on things that you can do today, if you want to get started immediately and make your data safer. As I said, cybersecurity is a huge field and is so large because of what we call the evolving risk landscape. There are so many things going on that threaten to damage or steal or corrupt your business data. Everything from fires and lightning strikes to hardware failures, software bugs in the applications that coming right out of the box as you install them. They have bugs that have vulnerabilities that may never be fixed and yet somehow threaten your business data. Of course, the internet-borne vulnerabilities, everything from phishing to identity theft to Equifax breach. The National Security Agency, they just had a huge breach. It's frightening. The Internet of Things, you have TVs and refrigerators and even power plants that are connected to the internet and probably shouldn't be. A significant risk to anyone, to any business, to any organization, are insiders with access. Folks who have the keys to the kingdom, who know all about where the data is, and who one day may decide that they want to do something bad because they're unhappy or because they're desperate. Another big risk are third-party providers who are handling your data or who are involved with it somehow, even internet service providers and information technology providers who may not have adequate safeguards around your data. Like I said, it's a huge, huge field, and it can be very daunting to deal with, to even get to become educated. It can be depressing. It can make you become cynical and apathetic. And one way to deal with that is to simply focus on what we call the trending risks, to recognize the things that are happening today, to look at the things that might actually land on your desktop or come to you in an email, and deal with those things first because they're most likely to occur. The bad guys are used to be doing this for the fun of it, but these days they're doing it because they are seeking profit directly. And that might be a government actor, it might be a political actor, it may just simply be someone who's really desperate for money. They are carrying out social attacks through email, for instance, and they're trying to deliver ransomware to make it impossible for you to recover from the attack unless you pay them money. And of course, the e-commerce website attacks, these are the breaches that we hear about all the time, everything from social security numbers to credit card numbers, because those things are valuable to somebody somewhere. There are consequences to not looking at these risks and not preparing for them. The least of which would be downtime. If you get ransomware attack or if you have a hardware failure, if there's a lightning strike and you're not using the proper surge protectors, for instance, then your business is down because your critical business data is resting on the workstations and the servers that will no longer turn on. If what happens to you is bad enough, for instance, in the Equifax breach, look at how their reputation has been damaged. The NSA breach, the National Security Agency lost some of their most important tools, and there's a loss of reputation that sometimes you never recover from. Small businesses go out of business all the time after cyber attacks, ransomware attacks. They go out of business through loss of reputation. You may also have additional responsibilities that you haven't looked at. For instance, if you are transmitting or storing or somehow dealing with what is considered by the Department of Health and Human Services to be protected health information, then you may be liable to comply with HIPAA. If you're processing credit cards, if you have a little card swipe in your place of business, or if you even have a little square that you've stuck into an iPad, then you may be responsible for complying with the for PCI DSS, which is the security standards that are insisted upon by the payment card industry. If you are doing business and you're registered with a state and you are keeping somebody else's data, anyone else's data of any kind, even so much as a name and an address, then you are most likely liable to comply with your state's privacy and breach law. And the privacy and breach laws in each state are just different enough that if you are doing business in more than one state, you really need to understand the differences and understand what you need to do to comply. If you're using managed services, such as information technology services or what they call managed security services, then you might want to ask your provider some questions. For instance, if you are HIPAA compliant, then it's very likely that your cloud providers, your managed service providers, should also be HIPAA compliant. And they certify that by you extend to each other a business associate agreement, which basically states that you have the right to look at their HIPAA compliance as if it were your own. If for any other managed service provider or any other kind of third-party service provider that is looking at your data or handling it, you want to find out who has access to that data when you're not around and how are they protecting it. You would like to ask, for instance, if they are encrypting your stored data and doing so in a way that a limited number of people, a list of people that is well known, and only those people can access it. It'd be important for you to make sure that your service providers have some kind of stated security practices, if they have a privacy policy. And if you can get copies of those things to make sure that they are treating your data as importantly as you do. In other words, that they recognize that your business data is the crystallized value of your business. What we've been talking about is the first step of the risk management process. Risk management sounds like one of those things that's only for big companies, for big businesses, but it's an important tool that allows you to begin to think about risk and begin to deal with it. What we've just talked about, the evolving risk landscape and risk trends that might be affecting you today, that is the first step in what we call risk assessment, where you look at risks that affect your business, you look at additional responsibilities that you may have, and you decide how each of those impact you and to what degree they impact you. After you've done that, you look at where you are today with respect to where you should be in your cybersecurity practice. That's called a gap analysis. Do we have a good firewall? Do I know how to modify it? Do we have a business-grade router? Do we put uninterruptible power supplies on our workstations and servers? And if not, then you create a remediation plan that says how you're going to get from where you are to where you need to be. And of course, the risk management process is a living process that you cycle through at least once a year or maybe twice a year, or anytime there's a significant change in your business practices, or if there's a significant new emerging risk that you need to deal with. So congratulations, you're now thinking like risk managers, and it's an important tool. So far, it all sounds like bad news. Your business is vulnerable, and maybe you're not where you should be with your cybersecurity practices, but there's good news. And the first piece of good news that I've already brought to you today is to talk about the risk management process and to help you get started with it. Congratulations, you've taken the first step already to making your cybersecurity process stronger, and you've done so for no other investment than simply listening to this talk. The backups, good backups are, of course, we're going to talk about why those are important. Training your folks, your people, your staff, your stakeholders to recognize the risks themselves, how to resist clicking on something they shouldn't click on, for instance. And I'm going to tell you about some free resources that are available to you immediately. And in a little while, Janice Hall is going to talk with you about the grant process. I think you get the risk management process by now and how important it is. It's a tool for improving cybersecurity generally. But another part is if you have some of those additional responsibilities, like you must comply with HIPAA and you get audited, then the first question they're going to ask you is, let me see your risk assessment. And if you have a documented risk management process, if you simply document your intention to follow through with the process, it might help you in terms of an audit or a data breach to reduce penalties and fines and other punitive damages. Backups. Here's the truth about disaster recovery. I have been in a lot of businesses. I have had to deliver the bad news to folks that their critical business data was simply gone, that the 10 years of patient information, 5 years of point of sale data, just gone and never coming back again. And it's a situation that I don't want to be in, but I have been there often enough. I've also been able to go to many people and say, guess what? Your server is dead, your workstation is toast, but you have a good backup, and I will be able to get you up and running again by the end of the day or by the end of the day tomorrow. The difference in those two scenarios, there's only one difference, and the difference is that they had a good backup. There's several good ways to do backups. There's some ways that are not so good. There's the CodeStar recommended backup that we'll be talking about later in this series. But the truth about disaster recovery is that any backup is better than no backup. If you should be backing up every day with a data stick, if nothing else. Sometimes folks back up to the cloud, and that might be okay for your business. But if you have protected health information, if you're a covered entity, if you are keeping private information of other people, you might want to think about the cloud backup and maybe choose a different method. There are several really good training opportunities. They're available for free. And those will be in the links in our 10 for 10 guide that we're going to show you, that is going to be available on our website at the end of this talk. There are also free and open source solutions that are available to you immediately. The anti-malware that comes with your computer or that comes with your server may be a good choice, and it's certainly better than nothing. There are some really good anti-malware scanners and cleaners that are available from sites like Bleeping Computer that are extremely effective. Your vendor, which in most cases is going to be Microsoft, or Apple, supplies OS updates for security and patches for bug fixes, and you should stay up to date with those just as often as you can. There are email softwares available, like Thunderbird, for instance, that have built-in spam filters that are very effective and that can be trained to recognize the kind of spam that you get, but not interfere with the email that you want to get. Web browsers with security plugins, you probably know that Firefox and Chrome allow you to add plugins that significantly enhance your security. And I would recommend that you take a look at those and begin to use them. Another great source for all kinds of help is TechSoup at TechSoup.org, who offer help with products, hardware, software, as well as IT services. You should take a look. And now, I think Janice Hall is going to come and talk with us about grants.
Hi folks, I'm doing double duty behind the camera, and also wanted to step out and share a little bit of my perspective as someone who has done research on grants and applied for them. Here, I have some questions that you can look through, Charles. We're going to have Q&A after the main talk here, so that's what that's about. So in terms of grants, if you're a nonprofit, you probably already know that a lot of grantors want to give you money for a certain project, something that is not an administrative cost, but something that's going to help who you serve, whether that's animals or senior citizens or youth. So it's a challenge as we look at improving the information security, cybersecurity in your organization, to figure out maybe how to describe the need and convince the grant committee that they should give you money for that. If you go on to look at grants at the Foundation Center's database, you'll see large cybersecurity grants that have been given to mainly big organizations like schools, universities that is, or to organizations that are going to start a, say, a digital learning center. Well, that's not you. You're not going to see examples of how should I frame my grant. And so that's the bad news, but there is some good news. As you know, cybersecurity and data breach has been in the headlines. Any grant committee that you ask to support your efforts to improve your information security should have that background already. So that gives you a step up in the process. And what I'm suggesting for strategies is, you're not going to probably be looking for large grants. You're going to be looking for smaller amounts, maybe to buy some equipment, or to hire a consultant, or to do some training for your staff or volunteers. And you may be able to add that as a line item on a grant that, say, you're applying to a grantor who funds equipment purchases mainly. Add in a line for cybersecurity along with your regular IT equipment, or training to go along with that, so that your staff or volunteers don't compromise the system that you've just gotten that investment to put into place. So strategy number one, add cybersecurity as a line item. And then the second approach, if you are just finding a grantor, say a local or regional grantor that offers small grants, and you want to propose a cybersecurity project to them, be sure to paint the picture of the human connection in this cybersecurity program. So you want them to understand that you're trying to be a responsible corporate citizen and understand that you are protecting the people who entrust you with their personal information, whether those are clients or your donors. This is all very important for those individuals, and it's also important for the future of your organization, because obviously breaches are really tragic in terms of your reputation and the trust that people place in you. So those are my suggestions for today. I will also mention that we have a survey we've put together assessing the need for charitable cybersecurity services for nonprofit organizations, especially focusing on New England right now. And if you go onto our website to get the slides from this program or our 10 for 10 guide, which we'll tell you about in a minute. The survey is also there, and I really encourage you to take the survey because it will help show grantors the need. And for that matter, the more of you that submit a grant application that really draws a picture of why you need cybersecurity and information security, the more the grantors will wake up and start being willing to address these needs. So don't be afraid, even if you think you might not get it on the first try, don't be afraid to ask for grants for this. And, we need to make it a high priority area. Thanks.
And we said cybersecurity is a gigantic field, and the news, daily, the news of some new breach or some new form of attack, it seems like we hear about it every day now. And the people that we used to trust, whether it be Equifax or Target or Yahoo, have lost what we consider to be our most private information. And we find that it's in the hands of a government actor or a political actor, or maybe somebody who just wants to sell it for profit. It's a lot like the zombie apocalypse. And it seems like it's the show that's playing on every channel. You go to every cinema, and up on the marquee, it's 6 or 8 showings of the zombie apocalypse. You just can't get away from it. But there is one thing you can do to protect your critical data backup that makes all the difference during disaster recovery, and that is to do a backup. Do it daily. Choose the information that you consider to be the most valuable and put it someplace where it can't be gotten to. If you use a data stick, copy and paste your files, your photographs and your business documents, copy and paste onto that data stick and pull that data stick out and put it someplace where it's not connected to the internet. Ransomware searches computers and can search networks for critical files and encrypt them. And these days, the encryption is good enough that you probably aren't going to get your data back unless you pay for it, or unless you have a backup. I would say your backup is not as good as you think. Make sure that your backup is running. Make sure the data is on there. Verify regularly that your data is actually on your backup method, whatever it might be. All right, in just a second, we're going to start our Q&A. If you have questions, you can send them by email to info@codestar.us, or you can submit them on the Facebook page. I'd like to ask you to mark your calendar for part 2, same time, same place, next week. And our title then is going to be, do you think you're all set? Think again. We're going to talk about good backups and spend a little bit of time on what we think of as the CodeStar recommended backup. The slides today, the survey that Janice mentioned, and as well as our 10 for 10 guide are posted at www.codestar.us/nonprofits. The 10 for 10 guide, now that we have the ball rolling, is 10 things that you can do in about 10 minutes that can significantly improve your knowledge or give you a method that you can use to significantly enhance your cybersecurity right away. So you could be reading our guide, just do one every day during your coffee break or during your lunch break, and by the end of 2 weeks, by the end of this series, in fact, you'll be in a really good place in terms of compared to where you were. And while you're there, sign up for our security tips newsletters. There's one for nonprofits, there's one for those that are covered entities, there's a general cybersecurity newsletter, and 1 or 2 more as well. All right. So I mentioned that we're going to start our Q&A. We have some questions, and I'll just start at the top of the stack. Is it a problem if I'm using an older version of Windows? The answer is Probably, but maybe not. I will tell you that the gigantic breach that they just had in the UK at the National Health Service occurred because they had a large number of Windows XP workstations that they were using that no longer receive security patches from Microsoft. Every vendor eventually abandons their software or their hardware, be it Microsoft or Dell or Google or Samsung. They eventually abandon the hardware that they're supporting in terms of supplying patches to the OS for security and bug fixes. If you are a covered entity and your old box is connected to the internet, then that is probably not going to be viewed as a diligent security practice during a risk assessment or during an audit. If, however, you're a one-person shop and the box is not connected to the internet, or all you have on it are non-critical pieces of information like pictures of your vacation, then there's really no reason to worry about that box. The key is, do I have critical business data? Do I have protected health information? Is the box connected to the internet? And am I regularly applying updates to the OS in terms of patches and bug fixes? And that should help you decide. Next question, how do I decide if HIPAA applies to my organization? This is a very good question, for instance, in the new industry of marijuana dispensaries, because traditionally a dispensary, you go to the counter, they look at your card, you say what you want, they take your money and you go away, and that's the only transaction that occurs. But in some states, the dispensaries are beginning to look an awful lot more like covered entities. They have websites, and they're following a wellness approach, and they are actually keeping your protected health information on their network. They might not be transmitting it because, of course, they're not sending out insurance claims, but they might be trading it between all the dispensaries in that state. And if they are transmitting protected health information, then they might very well be a covered entity. If you are receiving or storing or transmitting protected health information, then you may as well go ahead and consider yourself as a covered entity and begin to comply with HIPAA high-tech. It's not that difficult. It requires a little bit of diligence, it requires a little bit of documentation, but if you start and keep up with it, and treat it as a living system that you need to pay attention to on a daily basis, then you can get there in terms of HIPAA compliance. Here's a question that says, I don't know how to change my router settings. Can you help? Not standing here. Typically, to modify the router settings on any side, the inside of a cable modem, for instance, you need to have access to the box itself. And every box is a little bit different. Netgear, TP-Link, Buffalo, D-Link, they all have web interfaces or a method of talking to the router using a web browser, but they're significantly different in terms of the way they build that interface and in the various features that the routers have and the things that you can modify. I would recommend that you contact an information technology service, or you can certainly call CodeStar and we'll get you the help that you need. What is a firewall anyway? The internet works by transmitting data, and that data is divided up into little pieces called packets, and those packets are sent from one place to another basically by routers. It's a lot like when you take your letter and drop it in the mailbox, and the postal worker, all the postal workers take your piece of your packet of mail and they move it along through the system to its destination. Now, the data that gets sent on the internet, there are many, many packets, not just billions or trillions, but many, many packets of data that are moving very quickly. And those packets not only carry the information that you're interested in, but they also carry the cyber attacks. A firewall is a device that looks at each one of those packets, not only individually, but together in terms of the data that they contain, where they're coming from, where they're going to, and deciding if that's legitimate data or not based on a set of well-known rules. And the router can take action to either block that packet or to drop it instead of forwarding it onto you. And it's referred to as a firewall in the sense of the way they used to build a brick wall in the places where they're assembling explosives, for instance. Or if you look at people who are launching rockets, then they usually have some kind of a firewall that they hide behind in case there's a fire or in case there's an explosion. Then the wall protects people from damage. What browser should we be using at my nonprofit? I would recommend a modern browser. I would recommend something that is well known, such as Firefox or Google Chrome. If you're on Apple, you might want to take a look at Safari, but you can also get Google for Apple and Firefox for Apple, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason I recommend those browsers is because they allow the use of plugins, and you can control cookies, you can control the various mechanisms that are delivered to your browser by web servers, some of which get used maliciously. You can even do things that have a lot of hubbub around them, like blocking advertisements, which isn't good for advertisers and the people that rely on advertising. But keep in mind that advertisements are a way of delivering bad things to your computer. Some browsers do not allow the use of plugins and are inherently vulnerable because of it. All right, those are the questions that I have. I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks very much for joining us today, and be sure to be with us next time.